give you a little prelude into some of the things you're going to hear tonight. Back in the early 90s, I was put on the Georgia School Improvement Panel by Governor Zell Miller and Linda Srinko. And I don't know how or why it came about. And I was doing a lot of work with sex education classes in school. I was with the American Family Association, and we were fighting pornography. And what I found out is most of it was coming through the school systems. So we put a stop to a lot of it, believe me. But I told my wife when I got appointed to that council, I said, Diane, get in touch with the UN and find out what they're doing on education. And what I've learned over the years is a lot of what we're working on locally is somebody else's agenda. We just don't know it. Well, lo and behold, she got me this book. It was called UNICEF's Response to the Jamatin Challenge. Well, that's Jamatin, Thailand. They had an Education for All conference, 155 nations there. And I'm going to just read you a couple of quotes out of their brochure here. I won't bore you with all the details. But it says, UNICEF's collaborative efforts with countries in promoting the Education for All goals are beginning to suggest the essential elements of strategies required for universalization of basic education. So the UN wants to universalize basic education worldwide. It says here in another place, the obstacles to universalization of basic education can be overcome by applying pragmatic solutions. For instance, adopting and simplifying learning materials. Now, what does simplifying learning materials mean? Dumb down. Thank you. You caught right on, man. Basic education should become an entry point for the mobilization and action for achieving the priority social development goals of the community. Now, is that what you're sending your kids to school for? I won't mind, as they used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Put your finger on the globe and I'll tell you something about it. But the UN had a little different program. Now, what was interesting is shortly after the 1990 meeting was the United States Coalition on Education for All in 1991. I'll just read you a couple of quotes out of their book. We are nevertheless confronting a common challenge to enable all people to learn what they need to know to maintain a sustainable planet and to advance our shared goals for productive and satisfying lives. Here's another comment. Increased acquisitions by individuals and families of the knowledge, skills, and values required for better living and sound sustainable development made available through all education channels, including the mass media. Now, I didn't know that mass media was an education channel, but it is. Other forms of modern and traditional communication and social action. Now, right after the U.S. conference, we come down to Georgia. This was done in 1994. The Next Generation School Project, and it's put on, sponsored by the state of Georgia, the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. Let me tell you who they are. The Next Generation School Project is a collaborative effort of the state of Georgia, the governor's office, the Board of Education, and the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. How many of you belong to the chamber? How many of you thought it was a business organization? Not me. It's an educational organization that works with government. I'm going to give you another quick quote. This is their belief statements right here of the Next Generation School Project in Georgia. Learning is both an individual and a cooperative social venture. That's one of the things they believe. We believe the community and all of its aspects must build dynamic coalitions to function to meet the physical, emotional, intellectual, and social needs of all of its citizens, particularly its students. So you're in here too, and your children. It was really an eye-opener to me to see Jomaton, U.S., Georgia, the 9 criteria for the Next Generation School Project. Now I'm going to read you one. Establish a community collaborative. Establish collaborative efforts among decision makers from community, governmental, and private agencies, local business and industry, parents, and all educational systems to address the academic, the social, emotional, and physical needs of all children. And I just wanted mine to learn. I didn't know they was going to change their diapers too. But all right, here's the next item. Emphasize world-class performance. Focus on the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. How about academics? Which students should exit K through 12 public education system. Once outcomes are established based on community, state, national, and international global objectives, curricula content, instructional strategies, and learning organizations and assessment strategies will be aligned with strategic outcomes. Now, how many of you know that the UN is working on your local agenda and your local curriculum? Most teachers don't know this and don't care. And this is the Next Generation School Project, and you can see with all the tabs in there, all the hot spots that are important. But this basically tells how to do what they did here. Now, once I collected all this, I was appointed to the council to implement this. This is the Goals 2000 law, 1993, in March. My job was to allocate the money from this to the schools. I say my job, the panel I served on was to allocate the money to the school systems in Georgia to accomplish this. Federal money, yeah. Now, oftentimes parents are working, teachers are working, a lot of husband and wives are teaching, or they both got jobs. They don't have time to keep up with all this. But what I learned when I got into it is there was an agenda, it was being worked on, and I knew what it was. So it's kind of hard when they'd get me in those breakout sessions with a facilitator to facilitate me into something that I knew was wrong. And they don't like that. It's like trying to ride a bicycle with a broomstick stuck in a spokes. So our speaker tonight, James, is going to come up and tell us about the Common Core curriculum. And let me say this. Most of this didn't get implemented. And I'm going to tell you why. You've got good classroom teachers in many cases that are trained professionals, know how to teach, and they don't vary from academics. Even though the agenda was attitudes, values, beliefs, and behavior, you read through this, if you did all that, you'd have to have a psychologist in every room. But those teachers overcame a lot of that and taught anyway. Now, what I say is they're doing it in spite of the design and the law and the program. So when you hear about Common Core curriculum, this was one of the waves that hit the beach. And a wave hits the beach about every year. And it's just like the waves coming in at the seaside. The latest wave is the Common Core curriculum. It's splashing up on the rocks now. And it'll ebb out. There'll be another wave after it. But my point is, you need to know where it's coming from and what their goals are, because over time they will prevail. Now, the more you know about it as a teacher or a family member, the better your odds of not getting caught up in it. So I just want to show you the real materials. I'm going to leave it sitting here. If you want to come up and look in it, you can get an eyeful. So, Jane, I'm going to let you come up, give us the details.
I was thinking when he was talking about this next generation school project, the science standards that are being developed now are called the next generation science standards. So that was a generation ago for this. So I guess it should be the next generation. Anyway, my name is Jane Robbins, and I work for the American Principles Project. It's an organization in Washington, D.C., but you shouldn't look down on it for that. It just happened to be in Washington. It was started by a law school classmate of mine named Robert George, and the goal of the part of the group that I work for is to preserve parental rights and innocence of children, to fight government action that interferes with that. So about a year or so ago, we started working on this Common Core thing, which none of us knew anything about for a while. And we've learned a whole lot, and I feel like every day I learn something else about it, because if you turn over this rock and all these things come out from it. To tell you what the Common Core is, probably the best thing to do is to talk about what it is not. If you go to the website, the Common Core website, you will hear this is it's a set of K-12 school standards in English language arts and mathematics. And they are supposedly, this was a state-led effort, and it was voluntary. The state signed on to it voluntarily. And the standards are rigorous, and they will make our children able to compete in the global economy. Everything that I just said is not true. So this is what we're going to talk about. All right, so what is Common Core? It's, I'll give you a little bit of a history of it. And it goes back to the 90s. I mean, I'm reminded of Ecclesiastes. There is nothing new under the sun. There really isn't. It's all recycled. There have been people in Washington for decades who have wanted to have a national curriculum for all of these reasons that no one was talking about. So they've tried this before, and y'all may remember back in 1992 or sometime, they had come out with these federal national history standards. You remember that? And the standards were so bad, they were so anti-American and so politically correct that the Senate passed a resolution opposing these standards. And the resolution passed 99-1. And I was always wondering who was that one, and so I looked it up, and it was Senator from Louisiana. And the reason he voted no was that he thought the resolution didn't go far enough. I think he wanted these people taken out and stoned or something. So anyway, so the people who were pushing these national history standards learned three things from this. They learned that if you're going to do a national curriculum, you don't call it federal, you don't call it national, you have to call it state. They learned that you have to do it quickly and quietly. You can't let it go to anybody's legislature, whether it's on the federal level or the state level, because then parents hear about it and people get mad and it doesn't happen. And they learned that you don't start with something controversial. You start with math, you start with English, and English is a little more controversial than you might think. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So that's what they learned. So they've been working on this through the 2000s. And in 2007 was really when they got geared up to write these national standards, or these common standards in English language arts and math. The standards were not written by states. They were written by a group of people in Washington. It's a group called Achieve, Inc. Achieve is a nonprofit group that's connected with the National Governors Association but not controlled by the NGA. And so they wrote these standards, they were working on the standards, and they realized they needed to do this to make it look like it was a state effort. They needed to get some sort of representative body on board. So what they did, they went to the National Governors Association, which is a trade association in Washington. Not all governors are members of it. We don't know who's in it because they won't release the membership list. We know some people are not. Rick Perry is not in it. Nikki Haley in South Carolina is not in it. I'm sure there are other governors who aren't in it. But anyway, they're called the National Governors Association. And they also went to the Council of, I promise not to bore you with all of these groups, this is the last one. Council of Chief State School Officers, which is the National Trade Association of all the state school superintendents. So they went to these people and they said, we've got these standards and we want you to release them under your auspices so it looks like it's a state effort. And they said, okay, and they did. And so this is where you get this idea that it's a state effort. It came from the National Governors Association. So you get the idea that, well, there must have been some sort of convention and the states sent representatives and all that. That didn't happen. I mean, a lot of states had no idea this was going on. Most states had no idea this was going on. So this was in 2007, 2008. In 2008, President Obama was elected. In 2009, in February, you may recall the infamous stimulus bill, which allotted, $1 bajillion to everything in the world. And one thing that it did, there was an earmark in that bill. It was $4.35 billion given to the Department of Education. And Congress said, here's this money, do with it what you want. So they said, good. And so Arnie Duncan, who was the Secretary of Education, decided they were going to do the Race to the Top competition. You may be familiar with Race to the Top. Race to the Top was a program whereby they take our money and then give us the chance to compete to get some of it back. So that's what they came up with. Under Race to the Top, they were going to have the states compete with each other. And to have a realistic shot at winning any Race to the Top money, you had to agree to adopt Common Core. The standards were not out at that time, so you couldn't read them, you couldn't look at them to compare them to your current state standards, they weren't out. Not only did you have to agree to that, you had to agree to adopt the national test that would go along with Common Core. Those weren't out yet either, and they're still not. So, the Race to the Top application came out in November of 2009, and the rule was you had to submit your application by January of 2010. That's 2 months, including Christmas. Now remember what was going on in 2009. We were in a deep recession and the states were scared to death. They thought that their budgets were just being cleaned out and they were scared. They didn't know where they were going to get the money that they needed. So you caught them in a very vulnerable position. And the other thing that does not happen between November and January in most states is that the legislature does not meet. So they had to make this commitment right away, quickly. Remember, do it quickly and quietly without the legislature being involved. And the governor and the state school superintendent had to sign off on it. And so that's what happened. Sonny Perdue and Kathy Cox signed the application for Race to the Top, committing the state to adopt Common Core, sight unseen, and to adopt the national test, sight unseen. The standards finally came out in June of 2010, about 5 months later, and the states were given 2 summer vacation months to get the school boards, to the state school board, to agree to it. And Georgia only took 1 month because Governor Perdue was a big supporter of Common Core. They let him come to the meetings, and he considered himself in on the ground floor, and this was going to be great. So he said this will be fine. So the state school board said, okay, well, he says it's going to be fine, it'll be fine. So they signed off on it, and it would get us $400 million. $400 million sounds like a lot of money. It is a drop in the bucket of what it's going to cost us to do Common Core, believe me. So Georgia signed off on it. So we're in it, and we got a Race to the Top grant. Now, what does it mean if you adopt Common Core? What it means is that even though under the Constitution states are in charge of education, if you agree to adopt Common Core, you are giving up your constitutional autonomy over education. It means that you have agreed to adopt the standards word for word. You can't change anything, you can't delete anything. You can add a little bit. You can add up to 15% in a particular content area. But whatever you add is not going to be covered on the national test. So how much time do you think teachers are going to spend on that? So you have to implement them word for word. Now, there are currently 45 states and the District of Columbia that have signed on to this. Texas refused to do it. Rick Perry said, I'm not quite sure why you expect us to give up our control over education and let people in Washington run things. And Alaska refused to do it. Nebraska and Minnesota took half the standards and didn't take the other half. Virginia has since withdrawn. As soon as Bob McDonnell was elected, they withdrew because he said, wait a minute, we just spent $1 jillion doing our own standards and now we're going to replace them with these. That doesn't make any sense. So Virginia is out. And we are working in various states to get some grassroots efforts going to get out of the standards. So that's a little bit of a history of what's going on. If anybody has questions, please stop me and ask. So I've done this so much that sometimes I think that everybody knows it has been in it as much as I have. And so if I'm not making something clear, that's my fault. It's not yours. So please ask me. So let's look at the standards. All right. As I said, they're in math and English. The math standards, and I'm not a mathematician, so I can't give you the details of this, but I have people who have testified with us in various states. I have talked to mathematicians. The only mathematician on the Common Core Validation Committee was Dr. James Milgram, who is at Stanford, and he said it would be almost a joke, I'm quoting him, almost a joke to think that a child could come through the Common Core system and be ready for college math, for university level math. One problem is that they take algebra, which most school systems have started moving into 8th grade, and they move it back to 9th grade, which means that for most students, you're not going to reach calculus during high school. And that's expected by selected colleges. Now in Georgia, I've talked to people at the Georgia Department of Education, and they say, oh no, we're going to have an accelerated system where you can do it. And so I trust them that they will have an accelerated system, so some kids could do it, but it's going to have to be kids who know by 7th grade that that's what they want to do. If you wait, it's for most people, you're not going to hit algebra until 9th grade. The other problem, this is, I think, the really interesting thing about math, is that the way they want to teach geometry is not the way you and I learn geometry. It's being taught by an experimental method never used successfully anywhere in the world. This method was developed by a Soviet mathematician in the 1950s. Because he was looking for another way to sort of get this concept across. And so he came up with this approach, and he tried it on a class of Soviet math prodigies. And they didn't get it. And so he said, okay, well, that's a good idea, but I guess not. So that was the end of that. It's now back in Common Core. This is the way they're going to teach it, because it's new and different, and they think it will work. I have to give you an example of the sort of unique ways they're teaching math. I know you've heard of fuzzy math, and you think about the new math from years gone by. We have some of our troops in Indiana. One of them is a woman whose her child, who was a 3rd grader last year, came home with their Common Core aligned math book. And she took a test, a math test, and the test was this. One thing you learn about Common Core math is not working problems. Is they give you word problems. You have to read and read and read, and because you've got to apply it to all of these. It's not at all the way anybody in the history of mankind has ever learned math. So this problem was for the 3rd graders. Bridge A is 470 feet long. Bridge B is 430 feet long. Which bridge is longer? How do you know? You have to explain how do you know. So the little girl answers the question. She says, Bridge A is longer, and I know because I looked at the numbers. 470 is greater than 430, and so I know that Bridge A is longer. Wrong answer. The reason that's the wrong answer is that that's not the way she was supposed to do it. The way she was supposed to do it was to take the add-ins, I'm sure what an add-in is, the add-ins in the hundreds column, and I'm also not sure why you start with the hundreds column, and then you do the add-ins in the tens column, and then you do the add-ins in the ones column, and then you figure it out that way. And because she didn't do it that way, she got it wrong. So, and this is the way the tests are going to be created. Kids will be taking these tests. So if you come out of a school that doesn't do Common Core and you're taking this test, you're going to say, what? So that's the math. Now, on the English standards, this is the part that, to me, even if it weren't unconstitutional and legal and all this stuff, it would be worth turning down because of the philosophy behind the English standards. And before I forget, let me tell you, the other thing we hear about Common Core is that this is not curriculum, that it's just standards, and the states and the local districts will still be in charge of their own curriculum. Okay, well, the point of standards is to drive curriculum. That the standards lay out what's supposed to be taught in school, and the curriculum adds the details, but that's the whole point of it. And there are two consortia of states that are writing the test to be aligned with Common Core. And in those consortia, they have said that what they're doing is writing curriculum models. And guess who's funding the consortia? The federal government. So, and the federal government also is forbidden by 3 separate statutes to supervise, direct, or control curriculum. But they're doing it because they gave $360 million to these 2 testing consortia, which are writing the test and writing the curriculum models. So that's that. Getting back to the English language arts standards. Sandra Stotsky is a professor at the University of Arkansas who is maybe the leading expert in the country on English standards. She's worked with various states on helping them write their own standards. And she was on the Common Core Validation Committee, and she refused to sign off on them because she said these are terrible. She said they were terrible because they don't have any content to them. They're just skills. She called them empty skill set. Find the main idea in a particular piece of writing or something. And as she said, you could do that with Moby Dick, or you could do it with Little Pigs. The Common Core doesn't express a preference about that. It's just, so you use it on whatever you want. But it's things like that. It doesn't. There is no. There are some suggested readings, but not much. They suggest for high school total two Shakespearean plays. Other than that, there's no British literature in it. Read so much for John Milton. And it does talk about American foundational documents, which Sandy Stotsky got them to put in. They didn't even have that. But American literature, they don't really say, well, you really should read Mark Twain, or you should read Hemingway or something. It's just not there. It's all skills. You've got to be able to pick out this. You've got to be able to pick out that. The guy who wrote the English language arts standards is a guy named David Coleman, who, by the way, has never taught English anywhere. And Sandy said it is astounding to her that he is ruining English education in this country, and he doesn't have no idea what he's doing. But the really, really bad thing, in my view, about the English standards is that they diminish greatly the amount of classic literature that children read, that students read. They've indicated, it's a little bit unclear, but they've indicated that up to half of the curriculum in the English classes should not be literature. It should be nonfiction. It should be what they call informational texts. And the reason they say that is, well, when people are out on jobs, and when they go to jobs, and the whole thing we're doing here is training kids for jobs. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. We're wanting these kids to be cogs in the machine. And what they say is that, well, they're probably going to be reading nonfiction on their job, and therefore they should cut down on the reading fiction in the school, and that way they'll be better at reading the nonfiction. Well, okay, that's fine, except there are no studies that support that. all the studies that have been, and there was a paper that came out just last week on this, studies support that the more good literature you have in classes, the better kids read. And the better you read, the better you read everything. I mean, I've never read, I was never taught to read a grant application or something, but I could read, and I can read well, so if you tell me to do a grant application, okay, well, show me one, and then, okay, now I can do one. And that's the way we all are, if you learn to read. But if you teach kids grant applications when they're in sophomore year, it's so far removed from their experience, and, they don't, how boring is that? Nobody's gonna be interested in that. But that's their idea, that somehow they're gonna produce better readers by getting rid of the good literature that makes kids love reading. So, but that all fits in with the general attitude, which is again, going back to the 90s, the old school to work philosophy, that what we're doing here is just trying to spit out workers for the economic machine. And of course, this economic machine will be planned by really smart people in Washington, and you really don't need to have kids who have actually read anything and had to think about anything. And this is where we get into the realization that this is not an issue that breaks naturally along, right, left, Republican, Democrat lines, because we see a lot of people, such as the Chamber, who buy into this idea that, well, yeah, it makes sense that we should be teaching more, technical manuals, because won't that make them better workers? And the answer to that is no. But so why does the Chamber go along with that kind of thing? Well, one reason is that the person who is financing all of this is Bill Gates. The money to develop these standards came from the Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have spent over $100 million creating the standards and getting them and lobbying for them throughout the country. And they have said that they're going to spend up to more than $250 million more to do that. And they are giving money to everybody and his brother. They're giving money to every educational foundation in the country, and all those foundations then hop on board. Yes, we're now pro-Common Core. We got money from Gates. They've done this with even conservative educational foundations, such as the Fordham Institute. In New York, they've done it with Jeb Bush's Education Foundation in Florida. Jeb Bush is the gorilla in the room as far as we're concerned, because he's very pro-Common Core. Because Jeb, let's face it, is kind of a big government guy. I mean, he really does think that if you've got, that you can control things from the top, and you just have to have really smart people at the top. Well, okay, but my experience is that when you have people controlling things from the top, it's never us who are controlling it. It's always somebody else, and it's always going to end up that way. So there is a lot of money out there. He's funding PTA. We saw there was an article this week in Ed Week online that he's given all this money to the PTA to get them to go out and talk to parents and sell them on how wonderful this is going to be. So let's talk. Oh well, okay. The other thing I was going to mention to you is something that Robert Scott said. Robert Scott was head of the Texas Education Agency. He was sort of their school superintendent in Texas. And Texas was one of the states that refused to go along with this because Robert Scott said, this is stupid. I've been doing this for 20 years and this is not going to work. And so he's not there anymore. He left this summer. But he was talking about the fact that Gates is behind this, and it's kind of a whole Gates philosophy. He said, think about how Bill Gates made his money. He made his money by creating an operating system that is used by everybody on the planet. And it's very efficient, and it runs very well. Not all the time, in my experience, but you get the idea. He thinks we can do that with education. That you can create a Common Core operating system, and you can impose it on every school in the country, and it'll all be great. And there are no differences between kids in Alaska and kids in Harlem and kids in Arizona, and it'll all be just, it's very efficient. And, for that matter, why do we even need 50 states? We ought to just have really, really smart people running it. That's what it is. It's the Bill Gates operating philosophy. And the federal government has jumped right on board with it, and Arne Duncan is just pushing it as hard as he can. they've also tied No Child Left Behind waivers to Common Core. They've backed off of that a little bit. For example, they gave Virginia a No Child Left Behind waiver, and Virginia had withdrawn from Common Core, but my cynical view is that the reason they did that is that Virginia is a swing state, and so they wanted to, they were mad there, but that's pure speculation. But, so the feds are really, really into it. They are really pushing it. As far as generally the quality of the standards, and we've talked about the math and the English, for one thing, they claim that the standards are internationally benchmarked, which means they've compared them to the standards of these high-achieving countries, and they're just as good. But the people on the validation committee said they were never given any information about that. They never saw any evidence of that. And if you go on their website now, they're not even saying that anymore. Now they're saying that these are informed by the standards of the other countries. We don't know what informed by means. And Jason Zimba, who is a guy who helped write the math standards, admitted at a meeting in Massachusetts back a couple years ago. Somebody asked him, what do you mean by college ready? Because this is kind of a no buzzword left behind law. And the buzzwords are career and college ready, seamless transition to college or career, compete in the global economy, state-led, voluntary, all these buzzwords just keep coming back. And so they said, what do you mean exactly by college ready? And he said, well, we mean a non-selective community college. We don't mean a 4-year university. These standards aren't even designed to prepare kids for Georgia Tech or UGA or anybody, or they're designed for the local community college. So another part of Common Core that we need to be concerned with is the data system that is being built. In the stimulus bill and in the Race to the Top application, there was a requirement that states build these massive student data systems. And the feds ultimately would like for the states to collect over 400 data points on each child. Things like, well, not only test scores, obviously, but family income range, religious affiliation, health history, disciplinary history, kind of goes on and on. And this is what they want to build. They're called SLDS, statewide longitudinal data systems. They want the states to build this. And why are they doing this? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that it's a progressive dream to have data on everybody. You've got to have lots of data so that you can track people. And they're very open about this. They want to track people from preschool through career so that they can look at all this education. They can say, okay, well, these programs worked, or theoretically they could say these programs worked and these weren't as good and whatever, because we track people and see where they ended up. They're tracking our children. The other reason is that there is a federal law that prohibits the federal government from maintaining a student database, a nationwide database. So they can't do it. So what they're doing is making the states build the data systems. And then guess what will happen? They will insist that the states share this data with them, and they're already doing that. We've seen it in Texas. They're demanding, well, if you get this grant, you need to give us this data on all of your school districts. And so the interesting thing about this is that the two testing consortia that are doing the national test, each one of these consortia has signed a contract with the U.S. Department of Education, and under this contract, they are obligated to turn over to the U.S. Department of Education student-level data, not aggregate data, not here's all the kids from Lowndes County or whatever, but here's the information on Johnny. They're obligated to turn that over, and we think that the way they're really going to get into the sharing of the data with the feds is through the assessments. Coincidentally, in January of this year, the federal government gutted the federal education privacy law. It used to be that the feds could not share data that they got from the states with anybody else except people who had a need to know, who were under their control, that sort of thing. Now, they rewrote the regulations without the involvement of Congress. The regulations went into effect January 3rd, and then under the new regulations, the feds can share the data with anybody they darn well please. The only thing, and it can be another government agency, it could be the Department of Labor, it could be the Department of Health and Human Services, it could be military, it could be, you name it. or they can share it with private entities, somebody who's doing research. The only thing they have to do is say, well, this is all part of an audit or evaluation of an education program. Well, I can make anything sound like an audit or evaluation of an education program, because education touches everything. So essentially, there is no more federal privacy law, essentially. That's an unfortunate case. So the data system all goes along with that as well, and there was an article in the Augusta Chronicle several months ago, which I've got printed out somewhere, about how Georgia is building its data system to track kids from preschool through PhD. So the minor problem with this is how in the world do you keep that data secure? Every day you read something about, some bank's data or some store's data or something got lost or stolen. The major problem is the philosophy here is that we are all lab rats, and you can have these people in Washington who are just examining us to see, well, how did we put this person in this program and see what happens, and put this person in that program, and then we'll share. And they're very open that they're going to be sharing this data with the Department of Labor because they want to track people into the workforce. And they've got this big joint effort going on, and they think it's wonderful, and I read it and I'm horrified. Oh my gosh, what are you doing with my child's data? We are always suggesting to the people in Texas who, I've decided that Texas is maybe the last sovereign state remaining, so if Obama gets reelected, I think I'm moving to Texas. But they spend half their time sort of, poking Archie Duncan in the eye to see if he'll react, and he generally does because he's very thin-skinned. And in South Carolina, he reacted, he blew up. We had a bill in South Carolina to withdraw the state from the Common Core, and he put out a press release about how South Carolina was these conspiracy theorists, and they were looking for this conspiracy that didn't exist. So we got a lot of mileage out of that because we said, look, if this isn't a federal effort, why does Arnie care what we're doing? Doesn't this prove that this is a federal effort? Because I think we got a couple more votes on the education committee for that. But anyway, let's talk about cost for just a second. I don't want to take up too much time.
Ma'am?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you're doing great. May I just ask one question? Shows you how slow I am. Back in kindergarten, first grade, I was taught A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Thank you. These Common Core standards, are not going to utilize that anymore, or is that been thrown out the window, or what?
Well, no, I mean, they will, and it actually, in the lower grades, they're not as objectionable as they are in the upper grades.
So 7th and up, middle school?
From middle school up, it's gonna be more problematic. Now, I really can't tell you how much they use the phonics. I mean, I think they do some phonics stuff, and so, it's not unadulterated horror. I mean, some of it is not bad, but a lot of it, of the philosophy of it, is bad, and it gets worse as you get higher in the grades.
Thank you. So adverb, pronouns, all that kind of goes out the window too then?
No, that will still be there, although Dr. Stotsky told me, and I haven't examined this myself, so I can't tell you, but what she told me about it was that they will still teach grammar, but they're doing it in a way that doesn't make sense. They're told to use terminology that is not what we're used to and not what kids have heard before. And she doesn't think that the way they're going to do it is going to be effective. They're still doing it, but maybe not in an effective way.
One more question, please. How much is this being pushed by the teachers' union?
The teachers' unions, the two big ones, the NEA and the AFT, are both in favor of Common Core. They are not doing their members any favors with this, because when the teachers see what this is going to be, they are not going to be happy. And in fact, we've got a website, which I'll tell you about, and we've got a comment section where people can go and talk. And we've gotten some comments from teachers saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But see, the reason that the teachers' unions are for it is that you will centralize control in one place. And the more centralized control, the more power they can have. They can influence the people. So eventually, even if the standards, if some of them are sort of high right now, they're going to come down. They're definitely going to come down, because it's just a lot easier to influence things when you know that, it's these 10 people I've got to talk to. But the teachers, so what we have here is a lot of teachers are disturbed by what they're seeing, and they're only being being implemented now in the lower grades. They're starting to be implemented in some of the upper grades, but mainly it's lower grades right now. So the high school teachers don't see it as much yet. When they start to see it, they are not going to be happy, but their unions are going to be saying officially, oh, this is great, yes.
Okay, one of the things I read was they wanted 90% of the children performing at the top level. And that you didn't move children forward until you got 90% of them operating at the top level. Well, we all know what a bell curve looks like on learning. And if you're gonna go from grade to grade in a normal progression, it's almost impossible to take 90 people in the top group. You know, normally what would that be? The top 10%, maybe 15% of the class? Well, to bring that number up to 90, you've gotta lower the standards where 90% of the people achieve them. And that's where the challenge is gonna come in. And it sounds good. We're gonna get 90% of our people performing at the top level, but they don't tell you what the top level is. The standards haven't even been put out yet.
I have not heard the 90% figure. That may very well be accurate, and I'll look into that. But I can tell you that my friend, the one whose third grader had the infamous bridge question on math, she's now in fourth grade, and she said a lot of the class is sitting there waiting for the other part of the class to catch up. She said they're kind of treading water, waiting for it. So they would fit in with what I do know is going on. And the idea, they are so focused on closing the achievement gap. I mean, that's what you hear all the time. And I was talking with a Bibb County school board member who said they get lectured about this all the time. You've got to close the achievement gap. And as he told me, I told Nolan earlier, he said it is a lot easier to close an achievement gap by bringing the top people down than it is by raising the bottom. But so what you may say, okay, well, but isn't this going to blow up when kids get to college finally and then they can't do the work? Well, there is a report on the website of one of the testing consortia. Now they're talking about higher education and how higher education fits into all this. And what they say is that they want a seamless, there's that buzzword again, seamless transition from high school into college. And so they want kids to be able to, once they come out of Common Core and they score a certain thing on the test, they would be automatically deemed not needing remediation, and they would go directly into college courses. And this will be a chance for the professors of college freshman courses to examine their courses and see if maybe they are demanding things that the Common Core students haven't had. And if so, there will be an exciting opportunity to revise their courses so that they will be in compliance with what Common Core does. So now whether you're really going to find college professors who consider it an exciting opportunity to dumb down their classes, I don't know. I would doubt it based on some people that I know who are teaching in college. But this is the idea, is to make everything, ultimately to make everything, to bring it down, to bring the level down so that it looks like everybody is achieving more. And if we're not competing so well against other countries, that's right. Has anybody ever seen 2016? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I have several things I have to say.
Go right ahead.
I retired from teaching high school years ago. If you have taught in a high school and you've had a student transfer from another state, even from another city within the same state, you can appreciate some of the positive reasons for a Common Core, especially for the last 6 years in Georgia. Because in Georgia, in 2012, the first class of GPS students graduated. The Georgia math curriculum that was taught for the last 6 years was the most challenging curriculum in any state in the United States. And to have a child move into Georgia from another state, they were years behind what we were doing. And the positive aspect of Common Core is that in a mobile society, people can move from place to place and not have future customer education. That being said, and one of the reasons I retired was because I did not agree that the Georgia performance standards were good for the student population I was teaching. It was too advanced. And it was my understanding at the time, for the math portion, Common Core was going to be looking primarily at the Georgia standards. And when you talk about algebra being saved for ninth grade and not being taught in middle grades anymore, that's kind of a vocabulary type thing. What I was teaching the first week of ninth grade is in pre-calculus and college students. And that's without it being done. The difference was that Georgia was expecting every student, regardless of ability, to be able to master this curriculum. And we're just not all able to master a curriculum at the same level. And like I said, that was the algebra strength. And as I understand it, as math teachers teaching this year have got conveyed to me, the main difference in GPS and Common Core is that in GPS is integrated. You taught part of the year you taught algebra, part of the time geometry, part of the time data analysis, probability, statistics within Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, but you didn't repeat it. Now they're pulling the algebra strands and teaching all the algebra together. The next course they teach all the geometry together, that type of thing. So even if it's called algebra for the first time in ninth grade, it's not necessarily going to be easier or harder. I haven't seen it. But just because it's called algebra, I mean, there's a wide gamut of what that could be. And the other thing is that GPS was designed to be taught in a format called task. And with the students we had, it did not work well. And when we actually tried teaching it in the task format, at the end of the course, the kids said, I don't think I know anything. When I was taught the way we used to be taught, I learned that doing these tasks, I'm lost. And it sounds to me as the task format is what has been dressed up with what you were talking about. But like I said, the big deal about Common Core is people moving around and having huge gaps in education. And in math, if you've got a huge gap and you come in and you're at point 3 and they're already at point 10, then you are pretty much lost for a long time. And one of the states that you referred to, unless they have recently changed, did not have statewide standards. They allowed every school and every school system to get their own standards within that state.
Let me speak to the question of people moving across states. I guess 2 points to that. One is that, I know Georgia's a state that does have a lot of people coming in from other places. Nationwide, according to census data, that's less than 2% of kids who move across state lines. Most people move within states. So it's actually, nationwide, it's a very, very small group. But the other thing I would say about that is that with Common Core, what they're going to do to equalize the education is not bring the poor states up. They're going to bring the higher states down. So if you were, say, a company and you were thinking of maybe moving to a state that had really good standards, it's not going to matter anymore because everybody's going to be doing sort of the same thing.
Well, one of the problems that's been true in education for the past 15 years has been that we, across the board, needed to put more
level, right, exactly. And one other thing that, I'm glad you mentioned this, you were talking about this task thing going on in Georgia that wasn't working. If you have that in Common Core and it's not working, there's nobody to call about that. You can't talk to your school superintendent, or you can't talk to your curriculum director, you can't call Dr. Barge in the state office, because none of them will have any power to do anything about it. It's too bad. They will have to persuade the majority of 44 other states to go along with it, to change it. And I was talking with the two women who do curriculum at the Georgia Department of Education, and I said, so what happens if you've got a math teacher who realizes that what she's supposed to be doing here is just not working with the majority of students? And she said, we gotta do something about this. And so Georgia can't change the standard. And they both said, well, if we're having that problem, we assume the other states will be having that problem too, so we can all get together and change it. Well, okay, maybe, eventually, but it's a whole lot easier to get something changed on the state level than it is to get it changed on a nationwide level. So I appreciate you telling me. I always like to hear from teachers who've actually been in this. The one thing that I wanted to, two other things I needed to mention. One is these assessments that are being written, which we haven't seen yet. There are two consortia of states that are working on assessments. One is called PARCC, P-A-R-C-C. What's it called? The Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Career. There's the buzzword again. Georgia is in PARCC, which means that Georgia has agreed to implement the PARCC tests in 2014, 2015. The other one is called Smarter Balanced, which is the sort of more way out one. PARCC is nothing to write home about, but Smarter Balanced is really crazy. But all of these tests, the PARCC tests will be completely computerized, and they will require a great deal more technology than we've got right now. So this is one of the cost factors of this is going to be tremendous, that the local school districts are going to have to invest, because you can't pull any computer out of the closet that you used to have, because it's not going to be able to handle these new and innovative tests. The other factor that is interesting about PARCC is that some of the scoring on the test will have to be done by hand. It cannot be done on the computer, not unless they really do wonders with artificial intelligence. And if I were a teacher, I would be real upset that my evaluation is going to be tied to a test that was graded by a computer on, to see whether some kid did a good project or something. And the Georgia people have told me that they think the test may be cost prohibitive because they just don't have the money to pay anybody to score them. So, one of our cost experts who testified in South Carolina said he thinks that it's going to cost about $100 per student per year when you add in all the technology costs and the scoring costs. That compares to what Georgia reported in 2007 that they were paying per kid per year was $8. So going from $8 to $100. And there was something in the paper or Ed Week or something last week that in Georgia they're saying that we're afraid it's going to cost us $20 to $22 per student. Well, they're dreaming if they think that they can do it for $20 to $22 per student, but at least they're admitting that there is a problem. But that's the assessment problem. The other parts of the costs are the two other parts. One is professional development for teachers, especially English teachers, because there's not an English teacher in the state who's been trained to teach these informational texts, these computer manuals or technical manuals or government documents. I mean, one thing they suggested was that English teachers teach court decisions. Okay, I've been reading court decisions for 30 years, and frequently I don't understand them. And you're going to take an English teacher who went to college and because she loved Shakespeare and she loved literature, and you're going to say, okay, now here's Brown versus Board of Education. Teach this and teach the what? That is bizarre. So you're going to have to retrain teachers to do this. And the other thing is textbooks and instructional materials. And this is where Bill Gates is going to make up some of his money, because a guy who used to work for Microsoft, for Gates Foundation in their education programs, pointed out to me one time. He said, look at every document that they put out about this will talk about how the students need to have the tools to do well. He said every time you see the word tool, that means computer product. And guess who's supplying it? Okay, okay, let me see what else I wanted to say about this. Let me see if what I completely missed. Okay, what do we do about it? We need a bill which we've already written, but we can't find anybody, well, we found one person to push it for us. We need to have the legislature say, stop. We're pulling out of this until we can figure out what's going on, and we're all notified of what's happening, and the teachers are notified of what's happening, and the parents are notified of what's happening, and you're not gonna turn over our educational autonomy to a bunch of people we don't even know. So the Senator William Ligon, who is from Brunswick, had such a bill last year, and it didn't go anywhere, because if you go talk to your average legislator and say, what do you think of Common Core, he stares at you because he's never heard of it, because it was all done under the radar. So we're in the process of an educational effort, but this is where we need people like y'all, people like Tea Party people, people who can get on the phone, who can write letters to the editor, who can call your state legislature, who can have other meetings, and I will come back. I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk about it. We just finished doing, or almost finished doing, a video on this, so if I can't come, we can send you a video that you could do a program around that. If you go to our website, we've got the website up now, and it's a great website, and the person who did it primarily, did all the technical stuff, is the lady who is sort of undercover. She works for a major school system, and they don't know that she's really, opposed to that, because of course the whole education bureaucracy is completely on board with this. But she did our website for us, and it's called stopcommoncore.com. And there are, yes, it's on here. Diane's gonna pass out some things, and it has the website, it has some information for you. There are a lot of things on the website that you can download, myths versus facts, that kind of thing. Please download it, print it out. If you wanna copy and paste anything from the website, have at it, just whatever. You wanna start your own website, I don't care, just use it and spread it. We're trying to get the word out. We're speaking to as many Tea Party groups as we can. We're speaking to Republican groups. And I discovered that Republican women tend to be better on these things than Republican men. Yes, ma'am.
I know you haven't touched on this, I'm just curious. Our kids live in, our grandson lives in Florida, and I'm curious about these FCAT tests, or whatever they're called, that they're making these children take in elementary. I was talking to a parent, and she was concerned because some of the things that were on that test, her son had not been taught. And I said, well, why would they test children if they haven't been shown that particular thing? Surely they take that into consideration when they grade these. Well, she was going to the library to look up this stuff to try to teach her son. Why would they do something like that? And they put a lot of emphasis on these tests. There's a lot of stress involved in this, even in elementary. Why is this something that they carry through all through school, the elementary?
They haven't done the Common Core test yet, so I'm not sure exactly what test that one is. The Common Core test, that they're starting to pilot them, but they haven't really put them in yet. But something that you just said reminded me, I need to tell you, Common Core has the chance to obliterate any benefits of school choice or any benefits of private school. Because if you make everybody take the Common Core test, and they're going to make the charter school kids take Common Core test, they're going to have to be teaching the same thing. And it can affect private schools. If it won't so much in Georgia right now, but like in Indiana with voucher schools have to agree to take the Common Core test. So they're teaching the Common Core curriculum. It will affect homeschoolers, because David Coleman, this infamous non-English teacher who wrote the English standards, he's now head of College Board. And what he wants to do is to align the SAT with Common Core, which means if you do that, private schools, homeschoolers, everybody is going to have to do that. Do we have time for another? Leave it up to you.
One more.
Okay, one more.
You said funding-wise that this started from an earmark during the stimulus package, and you said that we were competing to get back our money. Are we getting any money as a startup to implement this, or is it all on the state's dime to get?
We got the Race to the Top grant of $400 million. about half of which I think is gone now.
Right.
And the feds are threatening to withhold 33 million because they don't like what we're doing with our teacher evaluation.
Right.
Because they want teachers to be evaluated by, excuse me?
Right.
Bureaucrats.
Well, but they want student surveys to be involved, even down to kindergarten.
Right.
Survey kindergartens.
And I'm
But
a-
anyway, but to answer your question specifically, that money is going to a whole lot of different things. It's not
Right.
going just to Common Core. And it's gonna run out, the grant is only, I think, 2 more years. But when that runs out, we're on our own.
I'm a grad school student for special education, and everything I've seen is from federal and even some state. They think that the best idea for education is just to throw more money at it. It's No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. They think if we throw more money at it, it'll be okay. And I know the Cato Institute put out a graph showing from 1970 up till today, inflation adjusted federal spending per student, and it's skyrocketed, and it showed test scores just
I've seen that
exactly the
graph.
same.
The graph looks like a
Yes.
Saturday Night Live skit, and federal
Yes.
spending goes like this, and the
Test scores,
accomplishment goes just like that.
nothing.
Yeah, and it will be our money, and the thing is that the state halls who take all this money, who are so desperate for this money, they don't look beyond the next year. It's like somebody said, I think it was a coalition meeting, they said, it's like somebody giving you a Rolls Royce, you go, oh wow, this is great, and they're gonna, I've got this fabulous car, but wait, now I've gotta pay for the insurance and the upkeep and the maintenance and all of that, and suddenly it doesn't look so good anymore. So, okay,
From Christy Davis, who's a teacher, and she's going to talk to us about charter schools. And before she starts, I want to let you know that we've gotten in our next shipment of the book Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21, and we have a supply up here in our box of books for sale. And I have a new handout of why everyone is talking about UN Agenda 21. A free handout. Be sure to pick one up. Also, the deadline to register to vote is October the 9th, and we have someone here who has been trained in registration, and we have the forms here if you want to do that tonight. See my daughter Stephanie. Hold your hand up, Steph. Okay, thank you. And there's a group here that is going to be working to defeat the SPLOST, and if we run out of time tonight, if you will see my husband Nolan, and also Hugh Gibson is here, and we'll talk to those people right after the meeting. And the people that volunteered last time to be on my A team, we can talk after the meeting. I sent out an email today, which pretty much explains our next step. So right now, we're going to let Christy talk to us a little bit about why we need to vote no on charter schools. And Christy, thank you.
I'm an 8th grade math teacher at Hayhira Middle School, and so we can speak afterwards about some of those things, but it is going on. We are adopting Common Core right now. We're doing it right now. But I'm using this PowerPoint that I saw at the Page Summer Conference because I felt like it spelled it out very well. The vote is November the 6th. This was interesting to me. The background is, last year, the Georgia Supreme Court struck down a bill, actually it was a law that said that states could implement charter schools and against local approval. They struck it down because they said local communities should be the ones that decide if there's a local charter school in their area. That way the local board runs it. They said it was unconstitutional, so they struck it down. It's not fair to take local funds away from you, send it to the state where states can run the charter school in your community. We believe this, the Page Association believes that the court was right, and so do I. However, the supporters of that bill, of course, want it back on, they want the Georgia Constitution rewritten so that we can do that. So that's why these bills are on our ballot right now, and this is the way it's worded. Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state or local approval of public charter schools upon the request of local communities? Of course, it sounds very good that we should say yes. It's very misleading. And the reason why it is misleading is totally purposeful. it says something about local communities. We already have that right in our local community, our local boards, to go ahead and implement a charter school if we see the need. However, they put it in there so that voters that don't really know what's going on think they're helping our local schools by voting yes. However, by voting yes, it will be funding a parallel state school system that we have no control over. They actually did poll tested that ballot question. So, and Georgia is one of the few states that we cannot we cannot challenge the clarity of the question. So it's on our ballot in that method. We have tried, there's been several lobbyists that have tried to get it reworded. And we already have charter schools, and Lowndes County could get a charter school if we want it. However, this would be a charter school that would be run by state bureaucrats in Atlanta. There are deaf and blind charter schools, all kinds of charter schools. Of course, they give it a specific formula about how it will be funded. They just don't tell you where the money is coming from. As you know, we've already had a lot of budget cuts in our area, furlough days, shorter school years, teacher layoffs, larger class sizes, and some of these graphs show all of that. This is what the main thing I want you to hear is that if we already cannot afford the schools that we have, then why would we want to create a whole parallel school system when we can't even afford the ones that we have? Why would we want to create more schools? And it would take money away from our local schools in order to create those schools. And these are the things that would be affected: class size, teacher pay, teacher contracts, and there are some people that support it. But the main thing I just wanted to point out were these things. Your tax dollars would be going to the state in order to create these public schools. We would have no control over how those local schools, charter schools, would be operated. And just like you said, we couldn't call anybody up at our local school board and say, I do not like how things are being run.
Question, can a local school board now create a charter school?
Yes, we sure can.
What would keep them from doing that?
Nothing. I mean, it would just be a parent board. Right now, the ones that they want would be run by for-profit charter school. A lot of it is money. If you look at who supports it and their campaign, oh my goodness, there's millions and millions of dollars in their campaign. Whereas the Vote No one is just a tiny little section. Yes, we can have charter schools right now, today. It would just go through the local school board to do so. This would be a state charter school in our local community that we would have absolutely no control over. So that's what the vote is for. And I had no idea until I really
You're
started.
saying they're gonna be state schools,
Yes,
but it could be a local school, right?
it will be in your local community, but
I
it's
know, but
run
could
by the
my
state.
school board do one?
They can do one now.
But that's not a state-run school.
No,
Okay.
but that's what we're voting about. Yeah, they want it to
Change the
be,
Constitution says.
yeah, they want it to say that the state can do all of
I
those,
understand.
which is why it's unnecessary. Yes, sir?
I would imagine most teachers don't like charter schools because they're non-union.
Well, we don't have a union in Georgia. I mean, we're not unionized. I'm in a professional association, but it's not like the Chicago strike you see. We don't have that here.
Is that just in Georgia?
This bill is just on the Georgia ballot, yes.
I'm
This-
talking about union.
Every state is different as far as unions. But most teachers don't, I mean, at charter school, like our school board, we had a meeting last week, 2 weeks ago. Basically, yeah, we have to teach anybody who comes through our doors. Charter schools are not like that. They can get the cream of the crop out of all the schools, and leave the public schools with what they want. So of course, their test scores might be higher. And there's been research about charter schools. Last year in Georgia, the charter schools scored 3% lower than traditional public schools. So it's not, the proponents of this bill say charter schools are so much better and they score so much better, but that's just not true. Yes, sir?
If this amendment passes, would the local community still be able to have charter school in addition to the state charter school?
They still would be able to, yes, sir.
If they can find the money.
That's right, we can't even afford to, we just got a memo about how much paper we use the first month of school, which of course we have to make a lot of copies because we don't have materials for the copies. So, how can we not run a lot of copies when? Yes, sir.
Chris, isn't one of the problems with this amendment that what they're talking about doing is basically having schools that are not accountable to anybody locally? You would have a
Exactly.
state-run charter school
Exactly.
that, as parents and taxpayers, we would have no say-so.
Exactly, but your money would be used.
Our money would be used,
Right.
we're using our tax dollars, but we'd have absolutely
That's
no
exactly
say-so,
right.
we'd have no elected officials to complain to.
Right.
In fact, the people that will be running these charter schools for the state of Georgia will actually be private corporations.
Exactly.
So unless we wanted to buy stock in that corporation, we'd have absolutely no say-so.
And that's why
in how our
there's
money's
so much
being
money
spent.
behind this initiative.
But yet those corporations aren't giving money, are they? Our tax
Not,
dollars are gonna pay.
right, exactly. So that's why our public education would be hurt so much if this gets approved. There would be even more money coming out of our local economy. Yes, ma'am?
Christine, one of the school systems that wants to come into Georgia, in fact, there's already 3 here in Georgia, there's over 100 in the nation, are run by a Turkish imam. And he comes in and he brings all his people from Turkey in here to teach, and come in on the IB-1 visas, and when their 6 years is up, they just go to a different state. And this is what the people that are backing this want to see. We already have 3 of these in Georgia.
So I just want to make clear that we can create our own local charter school if that is a need in our community. We just have to go through our school board in order to get that to happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon because there is no money right now. And we are not a race to the top school. Lowndes County Schools did not buy into that. It was a choice by each school system whether you wanted to take that money or not, and we did not. I think Valdosta City Schools did, but Lowndes County Schools did not. Yes.
If we had a charter school founded in Lowndes County, would it be separate entity, Lowndes County and city would be
Right.
their own, it would not be a collaborative?
It would be your local school board, yes. Now, this would be totally different. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Okay, our meeting is adjourned. If those of you who are interested in the topics we talked about, proposing this cost, or talking about Agenda 21, help yourself to some of our free handouts. We have a few items here in the box. Thanks for coming.